In Australia, protracted, brutal battles regularly break out between neighboring hives. This is not a one-off clash. Scientists have documented attacks that last for weeks and even months, killing hundreds and thousands of worker bees. Attackers avoid building new nests. They take over existing hives, displace the old queen, seize honey and pollen reserves, and occupy the home under their queen. Such changes in ownership have been documented in field studies. Studies conducted on hundreds of mules have documented dozens of cases where the habitual construction of one species was transformed into the work of another. In other words, a de facto usurpation occurred. In some observations, the battle lasted months and ended with the complete replacement of the queen. This isn't a rumor or a local anomaly. This behavior has been confirmed by field observations, experiments, and reports from beekeepers. And we'll try to figure it all out. You probably know that bees pollinate everything you eat. All fruits, vegetables, plants. Basically, everything that blooms. Here, please, admire it. We need to move quickly, otherwise there will be nothing left of us. But, sir, this is the 10th time we've lost this hive. Don't worry, we'll definitely return, but with renewed vigor. This hive is no longer a hive. They're fighting and retaking this hive from each other. What am I supposed to do? Instead of honey, I get dead bees. Fuck it. Screw it. What are you doing? A dog. Bees do some very strange things. For those who forget, I'll remind you to do something below. So, the farmer in question is named Kai Gershau. And here's what he says. The hive is ruled by a queen. Her kingdom is thriving. There's plenty of food. Her offspring are growing. Her territory is vast. Everything looks perfect. But that's not enough for the queen. She's preparing for war. She has a special squad, security units. These bees are distinguished by their upgraded form. Their bodies are slightly larger, their movements are faster, and their sensory antennae detect the slightest rustle. They are fighters, ready for the first strike. But as soon as an enemy appears on the horizon, the alarm goes off, and it's not just the guards who spring into action. Even the regular workers, usually busy collecting nectar and pollinating, rush into battle. The cost of such raids is enormous. Thousands of fallen worker units remain on the ground. For the sake of battle, the queen sacrifices her faction's most valuable resource, bees, without which there will be no harvest or life for the hive itself. To bases stand in the Annerley suburb of Brisbane. To humans, these are simply houses and gardens, but on the bee map, they appear as faction strongholds. This hive is the center of the kingdom. Inside, there are fortified corridors, a supply of resources, and familiar reconnaissance routes. This is the base from which the army departs and where units return after raids. Just a kilometer away is the enemy hive. It's camouflaged among the same trees and fences, but it always feels like a camp belonging to another race. Its own queen rules there. Its own army is gathering there. A thin front line runs between the two bases, but today that line has shifted. Clashes have been raging along it for 3 days now. 50 fighters from each side take to the field. Their attack is simple: bites. There are no restrictions. Any unit attacks any vulnerable part of the enemy, most often the paws. The loss of limbs doesn't take a fighter out of the fight. He continues to fight as long as others remain. On the ground, legless bees grab wingless enemies in the air. The fight ends with a fall. Both fighters plummet and continue the fight until their last strength is exhausted. The entire battlefield is littered with the bodies of the fallen. There are no clever tactics here, sheer numbers decide. Victory will go to the base whose gates hold and whose army endures the longest. I've seen a lot. Bees have always fought, both within their own colonies and against their neighbors. But what I'm seeing here in Australia is on a whole other level. Two hives converge, and the battle drags on for months, not days. Hundreds of thousands of worker units are slaughtered. This is the basis of the economy. These are the ones who should be feeding and building, but they're dying one after another. And all for the chance to capture the enemy base. Honestly, it seems crazy to me. Such a strategy could have crushed any army, but these bees seem to have some sort of hidden targeting system. It's as if they sense a weak colony and target it specifically. Otherwise, I can't explain these losses. This looks like pure suicide. I've been observing Tetraganula carbonaria, the sugar bee, for years. This species has always behaved like an aggressive faction. The first to initiate attacks, the first to start wars. The lack of a sting is no disadvantage for them at all. They find other ways to inflict damage. But the real surprise awaited us later. We suddenly saw that their enemies weren't just colonies of their own species. The Tetraganula hakinxi had joined the fray. Two different races in the same location began a full-scale campaign. Interspecies warfare is almost never seen in nature, except perhaps among some ants. And here, a clash of bees unfolded before our eyes. Brisbane left the strongest impression. I went out into the yard and saw a field littered with dead bees. It was a siege. There were so many of them that it was impossible to ignore what was happening. We began investigating and found out. The battle lasted for months of real war. But let's return to the battle that didn't end last time. We need to figure out how it ended. The second battle lasted more than 2 weeks. The enemy managed to break through to the base gates, storm inside, and even pull several young from the nest. But the defense held. The colony managed to hold the fortress. The bees' special ability pheromones played a decisive role. In times of stress, they triggered an alarm, bringing more and more units onto the battlefield. This was the only chance to hold the base. Without this ability, the defense would have had no chance. Stingless bees rely on more than just pheromones and jaws. They have a special resource, resin. It's their main building material and weapon. Normally, resin is used for base development. It's used to build brood combs, honey, and pollen containers, and to reinforce tunnels. But in wartime, this resource is used defensively. Bees use fresh drops of resin to create barriers at entrances, sticky traps that turn approaches to the base into a minefield. Any enemy attempting to break through risks getting stuck right at the entrance. Over time, the resin hardens, requiring defenders to regularly reapply the layer. This shield works not only against enemy bees. Ants that invade the nest also become stuck in the droplets and lose speed. This is particularly evident in photographs. In one picture, the entrance is surrounded by droplets of resin, like barbed wire. On the other, it's completely covered with a thick layer, which simultaneously repels enemies and strengthens the entrance. When alarmed or at night, bees often seal the entrance completely with resin, turning it into a bastion that's almost impossible to penetrate. There are also active techniques. Squads of defenders carry resin in their jaws and special baskets on their legs. In combat, they literally coat their opponents, immobilizing them. Sometimes, predators or enemies are transformed into immobile mummies, completely encased in resin. But that's not all. Some bees even coat their own bodies with resin, turning it into armor. These fighters seem too dangerous, and many predators prefer not to tangle with them. But scientists have discovered a very interesting fact. Now, a little more detail. This is the first time I've noticed something odd about the fight. Stingless bees usually have a clear system. They recognize each other by scent. It works like an eye recognition system. Friendly ones are highlighted in green, enemies are highlighted in red. Sometimes two bees fall to the ground, locked in a grappling pattern. But suddenly they release each other and return to the swarm. It's as if the identification check has been triggered. But sometimes things go differently. They continue to fight to the death. And when we checked the genetics, it turned out that almost 1 in 5 fights ended with the worker bee killing her own sister. It was astonishing. In the heat of battle, the identification system broke down. Scents were lost, and units that should have been standing shoulder to shoulder turned into enemies. Here's what beekeepers say. You know, the funniest thing here is who's fighting. The females tear each other to shreds, but nothing could be more difficult. They're sitting there in a group on the branches nearby, as if nothing had happened. I thought they'd at least cover their own and get into a fight. But no, not right away. They're just waiting to see who wins, and then they'll make a pass at the queen as if nothing happened. That's the way they fight. Some toil and die, while others just watch and wait for it to be over. The third battle was the final one. The siege lasted 6 days. More than 1,000 labor units took to the field. The first wave of attack crashed against the walls, the second breached the defenses, and by the 6th day, the base was holding on to its last resources. The enemy breached the gates. Invading units stormed inside, dragging workers and hatchlings right out of the honeycomb and throwing them to die on the ground. The casualty count stands at over 1,000 for 100 young males and females. The defense failed. The campaign ended with the base's fall. The hive fell. Later, humans opened the ruined fortress and recorded a change in power. A new queen, the daughter of the queen from the attacking army, had taken up residence in the hive. The first days after the capture were a brutal cleansing raid. All the young men of the old line were expelled, but the process soon stopped. New units began to emerge under the victor's rule and worked for her army without hesitation. To determine how frequently such takeovers occur, researchers inspected 260 hives across Brisbane over 5 years. In 46 cases, they observed changes in the design of the bases. The familiar structures of one species suddenly resembled the work of another. It was a clear sign. One faction had seized another's hive and rebuilt it for themselves. And most importantly, this wasn't a one-time occurrence. These takeovers became part of the system. Bees of one species regularly took control of rival bases. I don't like this thing where bees start fighting among themselves. They might not care. They'll fight later, and the new family will be strong. But what about me? I'm only upset. While they fight for months, there's almost no honey. The hive weakens, and all sorts of nasty things creep in, mites, diseases. In short, it's a pain in the ass. But of course, I try to be clever. You see, one hive is crushing another. You put an empty one next to it. These fools think, aha, we've won, we can settle down. They start hauling honey, storing pollen, producing a new queen, and starting brood. Sometimes it works, but more often than not, it doesn't. They're stubborn. If they get a hold of someone, they'll fight to the death. While beekeepers try to keep their hives from fighting, scientists, on the contrary, deliberately pit colonies against each other, all to understand exactly how bee battles begin. I still remember the first experiment well. We set up to pairs of hives at the same height and orientation. Midday, when the foragers returned with their spoils, we simply swapped the hives, and total chaos ensued. Imagine the scene. Bees lugging nectar, trying to fly into someone else's house, and the guards greeted them as enemies. No arguments. Straight to the fight. Crowds in front of every hive. On the ground, there were tangled knots of workers. Even those fighting inside were pulled out. The two colonies hummed for a whole week, though the real carnage only occurred on the first day. In the second experiment, we went further. We took 6 old hives, removed them, and placed new ones in the same locations. In the morning, the new bees were given time to get acclimated, and in the afternoon, we released 100 workers from each of the old colonies. Naturally, they returned to where their homes once stood, but it was now a different base, with different owners. And once again, the guards perceived it as an intrusion. Huge clumps of bees had gathered in front of 5 of the 6 hives, and scuffles raged for hours. But it wasn't a massacre, more like a crush. By evening, everything had calmed down, and the next day, silence returned. Both experiments showed that just 100 bees flying in the wrong direction was enough to spark a real swarm of conflicts. The more attackers there are, the longer the anxiety lasts, the more violent the fights. And I also realized the most important thing: if the bees are already fighting, it's best not to interfere. They'll sort it out themselves. The weaker colony will lose, and the stronger one will take its place. And what about the other bees? The most curious thing is that it's not only Australian stingless bees that fight like this. In South America, there's a special faction of Lastri mellata. These bees are designed for raiding. They don't collect pollen or carry nectar. Flowers are a complete waste of time for them. No peaceful economy, only attacks. Their style is simple. They find someone else's base, break in, and loot the warehouses. They take everything: honey, pollen, propolis. They don't even try to build their own nests. Why waste energy on construction when you can take over someone else's every time? This strategy has become so ingrained that one species has completely lost its carbuncles, baskets on their legs for carrying pollen. They don't need them anymore. Lastri millet doesn't even have a unit called a collector. The entire army is made up of pilots. Their lives are a constant plunder. It all starts with a couple of small-time scouts. They circle the base gates, running back and forth, sniffing out the weak spot. A dead scout leaves a scent, a mark. For the others, it's a signal to strike there. A few minutes later, the raid begins. First, a small group swoops in, then new waves arrive. Dozens of thieves rush the entrance. They quickly increase their numbers to break through the defensive line. Guards are stationed at the gates. They hover to the side, intercepting enemies, grabbing them by the wings and legs. But the raiders' jaws are stronger. They're slaughtering workers right at the approaches to the base. The battle rages at the very entrance. The guards hold their positions, but the enemy waves press harder and harder, one after another. And most importantly, these raids don't stop after the first strike. Sometimes the raids last for hours, sometimes for weeks. The same hive is attacked again and again until the base is reduced to empty combs. The workers are slaughtered, the warehouses are looted, and the raiders fly off to find a new target on the map. This is the moment when tribute would seem like a good idea. Thanks for the like. See you soon.